Welcome to Standard 6C. In this standard, we will assess the impact of two events, the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution on democracy. Some historians would treat these as one extended event under the title The English Civil War. Our standards treat them as two separate but related events. The essential question we're trying to answer in this presentation is how did these events, the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution, promote the development of the rights of Englishmen? Now, I'm sure some of you are already thinking, wait a minute, what on earth does any of this have to do with me? Okay, why would these events that happened in England in the 1600s have anything to do with your life almost 400 years later? Well, keep in mind some of those people in England in the 1600s left England. Okay, a lot of the early settlers in what's now the United States came from England, and they brought with them those ideas of the rights of Englishmen. Okay, so 100 years later, at the time of the American Revolution, when Thomas Jefferson sat down to write the Declaration of Independence, and the revolutionaries were upset about things like no taxation without representation, when they were upset about the English requiring colonists to house English soldiers in their homes, when they were upset about the possibility of not having jury trials. Those were really all rights of Englishmen. The colonists and Jefferson were really thinking about the rights of Englishmen, many of which developed during the time that we're looking at in this standard. Okay, so our essential understanding here, the first is that this system of government we call democracy, it rests on the idea or the principle that government derives its power from the consent of the governed. A couple of vocabulary words in there. To derive is to get. Okay, so government gets its power, and consent means permission. You may have had in your school careers a permission form or a consent form that had to be signed at home. Consent means permission. So in other words, democracy says that government gets its power from the permission of the people. It really is the opposite of the idea we see in this painting. This is what divine right looked like. The government got its power from some higher being. Democracy really says no, that's not the way the government is structured. Government gets its power from the consent or the permission of the people. One example would be from people going out and voting on election day. Okay, these English rights, they're foundations, and by foundations, we really mean the base. Okay, just like a foundation of a house is the base on which it sits. The foundations of these English rights, they include things like jury trials. We see here in the pictures, again, you might be familiar from movies and TV shows. Common law is something that comes from England. And without getting too much of government class here, common law is a system of laws that's really based on the decision of judges, okay, as opposed to the written laws. Throughout the world where the English went, typically this form of law called common law. And of course the English judges with their cool wigs kind of followed. So the United States and throughout the world where the English had colonies have a system called common law. And then from your World I class, the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, the great document signed back in 1215 by the English King John. Okay, these are all the foundations or the bases of English rights. Okay, and our last essential understanding is that these two events, the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution, they're going to help develop these rights. They're not going to reverse or limit these rights. They're going to do the opposite. They're going to increase or promote these rights. Okay, getting into our essential understanding, we really want to have a knowledge of how the following events led to the development of what are considered English rights. Okay, so we'll do this sort of as a timeline here. Between the years 1625 and 1642, the English King Charles I ruled England, and Charles was a big believer in divine right. In fact, we even see him here in a painting kind of showing his view of why he was king. We see the hand of God or some higher being reaching down and placing the crown on his head. Okay, again, very opposite the idea you would have in a democratic system where the consent comes from the people. Charles believed he was king because God had chosen him to be king. And as ruler during this time, he very much believes that he was an absolute ruler and acted like an absolute ruler. Okay, that's all going to change in 1642. Okay, in 1642, the English Parliament, and Parliament is roughly the equivalent in the United States of our Congress. Okay, Parliament consisting of two houses, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, just like the U.S. Congress, House of Representatives, and the Senate. The Parliament got fed up with Charles acting like an absolute ruler. The Magna Carta, among other documents, said that the king couldn't be absolute. Charles wanted to be like Louis and Peter and the other absolute rulers in continental Europe. But England was different. England had these rules limiting the power of the king. They couldn't be absolute. Okay, and so in 1642, a war breaks out between the supporters of the king, known as the Cavaliers, and the supporters of the Parliament, known as the Roundheads. The Roundheads not because of the shapes of their heads, more because of their headgear, which we see here on the right. They kind of wore these rounded helmets, which gave them their names. Okay, 1649, the English Civil War ends badly for Charles I. It ends with his Cavaliers being defeated and with his execution. Okay, and again, this was a momentous event. This was one of the early times that a ruler had really been brought down by his own people. Again, Louis XIV in France, Peter the Great in Russia, absolute rulers. They're not going to lose their heads. They were absolute rulers. But again, if you're a king and you end up like we see in this wood carving, Charles, kneeling down with his head on a block and an executioner about to cut off his head, that's sort of the opposite of an absolute ruler. Okay, after a brief period of time after Charles's execution, Oliver Cromwell, who had been the leader of the Roundheads, takes over. Cromwell had fought against the king, and so he's not going to assume the title of king. Instead, he takes the title Lord Protector. And Cromwell, in a short period of time, becomes an absolute ruler himself. He pretty much becomes a dictator. Cromwell belonged to a Christian group called the Puritans. In the United States, you're familiar with them as the Pilgrims, okay, the Thanksgiving story. And these Puritans wanted to purify Christianity in England. They didn't think it was pure enough. And so Cromwell, as ruler, is going to get rid of things like the pubs and the theaters. Christmas, which Puritans didn't really consider a religious holiday, is going to be banned under Cromwell. Kissing in public, any kind of public affection, those things are all going to be banned during Cromwell's time. Okay, after Cromwell dies, even Parliament said, whoa, that went a little bit too far. And the Puritans are kind of pushed aside, and Parliament invites back Charles II, the son of Charles I, to rule. And this becomes known as the Restoration. Just like if somebody restores an old car or restores an old piece of furniture, they bring it back to its original condition. So in the Restoration, England brings back kings like they used to have and didn't have during the time of Cromwell. And Charles II, as king, is going to reverse most of Cromwell's laws, again restoring England back to the way it was really before Cromwell was the ruler. Charles II, though, is going to avoid some of the mistakes of his father. Okay, he's not going to be as absolute as his father. Okay, and in 1685 he dies. Okay, James II was the brother of Charles II. He's actually one of the sons of Charles I. He's not really going to be quite as good at dealing with Parliament as Charles II was. Okay, and one of the things that's going to annoy Parliament about James II, it was that he was Catholic. Both Charles II and James II, when their father Charles I got executed, they fled with their mother. They fled with their mother to France, and they grew up in France, and France is largely a Catholic country. So both Charles and James were very sympathetic to Catholicism, but James was even more so. James was actually Catholic. And the problem for James was that one of the roles of the King of England is also to be head of the church. Okay, and Parliament saying you can't do that. You can't be a different religion and be head of the Protestant Church of England. Okay, so Parliament wants to get rid of James. They really don't want to go back to war again. They already fought this guy's father. And instead what they're going to realize is that James's own daughter, Mary, had married a Protestant prince named William. Okay, and William is from what's now the Netherlands, a very Protestant country. And so Parliament is going to invite Mary. I mean, this is a really weird situation. Parliament invites the daughter of the king to invade England, to attack her own father, with the agreement that they're going to then become king and queen once they chase away James II. Okay, so they invade. The invasion is successful. It's largely bloodless. James doesn't put up too much of a fight in England. He's going to flee to Ireland, and William and Mary become king and queen. Okay, here in Virginia, the university, the College of William and Mary, founded in 1693, is named after the people we see here on the screen. And part of the deal was with Parliament was they got to be king and queen, but Parliament got them to sign a document known as the Bill of Rights, which in addition to the Magna Carta really limited the power of the King and Queen of England, much more so than France, Russia, Spain, and the other European countries. Okay, so from all this, we really have three effects. The first, as we mentioned, was the English Bill of Rights. Things like cruel and unusual punishments, the guarantee of jury trials, a lot of the things that get incorporated later on into the U.S. Constitution first appear in England in the Bill of Rights, and that was an effect of this period of time. William and Mary signed this document, and that from that point forward through the present day really limits the amount of power the English king or queen has. Okay, our second effect is from all of this back and forth, we really have the development of the world's first political parties. Okay, we see here in the British House of Commons the two parties, or actually there's many parties, but in this particular picture we have opposing parties sitting on opposite sides of the aisle. Again, that idea comes to the United States as well, and we see political parties develop here as well. Okay, and then our last effect is, as we mentioned, from this point forward, parliamentary power, the power of the people's representatives in Parliament, is going to increase at the expense of royal power. The power of the king and queen is going to, from this point on, continue to decrease, to the point that today the queen is largely a ceremonial position without any real power. And that concludes Standard 6C.